Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I will speak to you about the greatest enemy of all of us. Now, you may be wondering what that enemy is, especially given that a lot of media attention has been devoted to threats such as terrorism, nuclear war, oppressive governments, all of which are, to a greater or lesser degree, threats, but none of them compare to the threat that I'm about to discuss. Not even the great genocides and slaughters of the 20th century can come anywhere close. And for my religious audiences, no, I'm not talking about hell or eternal damnation or the devil. I don't even believe in any of these. What I'm talking about is something that has been accepted as routine and commonplace in not just our society, but in societies throughout human history. And it should never have been so accepted. What I'm talking about kills about 100,000 people every single day in all societies. What I'm talking about is death. Death through senescence, so-called natural causes, even though there's nothing natural about it. Indeed, all death is due to some kind of problem with the body. Most of deaths that occur in old age occur from one of three causes. One of these is heart disease, some kind of failure of the heart. The second is a brain illness, some kind of failure of the brain. And the third is cancer, cells of the body dividing uncontrollably and essentially going where they shouldn't and disrupting the functions of the organism, eventually disrupting the functionality of the entire organism and causing it to shut down. I repeat, there is nothing natural about any of these conditions. Most of them are extremely painful. Most of them are extremely debilitating, leading a person to lose his or her physical functionality or mental functionality, to suffer horrific pain for months. And even the ones who allegedly have the merciful fate of dying in their sleep when they're 90, why do they die in their sleep when they're 90? Well, their heart just stops beating. And that is a failure, if nothing else. It's not as if they were perfectly healthy and lived full lives up to that point. Their heart had been progressively weakening until the point where it couldn't pump blood anymore. I wouldn't call that a natural cause. I wouldn't call that having lived a full life up until its natural end. No. As a matter of fact, what is now considered death from natural causes, well, that would have been inconceivable even a few centuries ago. The life expectancy in most advanced countries of the world is in the high 70s or the low 80s. Now, this is unprecedented. In 1900, the U.S. life expectancy was only around 47 years. In the Middle Ages, it was only in the 30s in European countries. And so, if you live to be 50 in the Middle Ages, or if you live to be 60 in the 19th century, you were most of the time considered to have lived a very long, full life. And if you died, once again, of some kind of heart failure, or brain failure, or cancer, you were considered to have died of natural causes. But there was nothing natural about that. And today we recognize that if somebody dies at 60, that's an extremely tragic outcome. We mourn that person, for having passed so early. So why, I ask, should it be any different for somebody who dies at 90 today? Someday, when we do, and it's going to be a when, cure these terrible afflictions of the heart, of the brain, cure this terrible scourge called cancer, we will also say of anybody who died at 90, that person died way too young. And this is a perfect way to introduce my next point, which is the death of every individual, no matter how old or how young, is a tragedy of incomparable proportions. You cannot put any kind of quantifier on that tragedy. You cannot say, for instance, that the death of 1,000,000 individuals is a greater tragedy than the death of one. Because even if we lose one single individual, we have lost something that is completely irreplaceable. An entire internal world of memories, of experiences, of ways of looking at the world that will never again be replicated. Even if that person has left some kind of writing, even if that person has left some memories of him or her in the minds of other people, that's a very indirect way to access what that person was actually thinking, what that person was actually doing, that person's true motivations, and the broad and rich range of that person's experiences. That can never truly be replicated. Now, of course, I'm grateful that so many people in the past have left behind records of their existence. I'm grateful that I'm able to read Aristotle and Voltaire and Bastiat. But I still don't know what went on inside their minds. And moreover, billions of people are now irreplaceably gone, without a trace. Maybe a minority of them have left behind some kinds of names, most of which people don't remember unless they're genealogists. But the vast majority of the people who have died have left nothing behind. Their whole lives are gone, irreplaceably gone. Such a huge waste of human potential. Imagine what we could have learned from these people if they had been alive today. What kinds of skills they would have brought to us. What kinds of memories of the past, of other eras, of things we can only know about very remotely and indirectly from reading the history books. That is a huge loss. And I do not want this loss to continue. I do not want any of the people who are alive today to be gone in this fashion, be irreplaceably gone. Now, some people say, well, this is why you have children. The children will carry on your memory, your legacy, in a better way than anybody else can. And to some extent, that's true. To some extent, children know their parents better than anybody else. But what happens when those children have children, and their children have children? And eventually, somewhere down the line, the great-great-great-grandparents are forgotten, or very little is known of them, or they're only known as mythical figures, the founders of this particular line of the family, perhaps. But what about that rich inner world that these great-great-great-grandparents experienced? All gone, lost, forever, irreplaceably, intolerable. And of course, that's not all. The worst is yet to come. The true scope of this enemy we have not even begun to probe. Next time, I will show you exactly what is at stake and why we must defeat death itself. Greetings. Now, we shall discuss what is worst about death. Worse even than the irreplaceable loss of the contributions, the experiences, the memories of billions of individuals. Namely, what death does to you. Now, your only way of perceiving the world, of interacting with it, of reflecting upon it, is through your body, through the physical and chemical processes that occur within it. And provided that those processes remain functional to some extent, you are alive, you are able to interact with the world. When those processes stop, when enough of them shut down, you stop being able to perceive anything. You stop even being able to reflect on how sad it is that billions of other people are no longer able to communicate with us, no longer are we able to benefit from their contributions. Even the perception of that stops. So while it might be saddening to reflect on the deaths of others, eventually most of us go on with our lives. But this, your own death, is a blow from which you will never be able to recover. It is the worst conceivable thing that could happen to you, because not only will you not be sad, not only will you not be able to overcome anything, you will cease to exist as an individual. You will essentially enter a state of nothingness, oblivion. There are really no good words to describe this state, because our language is so object-oriented. It is so geared toward addressing things that exist, processes that exist. It cannot explain pure non-existence of the sort that an individual's life, the coherence of his organism, assume after death. Now, we can try a little bit of an experiment. Try to close your eyes. Close your ears. Shut them with your hands, perhaps. Try not thinking about anything. Try not feeling anything. Try somehow to not get the nerve endings on your skin to sense anything. Try it. Try not smelling anything. You'll realize quite quickly that what I'm asking you to do is an impossible task. There is no such state for human beings as a state of complete nothingness, complete non-sensation. It is absolutely inconceivable. Even when we sleep, even when we dream, we are marginally aware to some extent. Even when we're in a coma or we're under anesthesia, there is some very low level of functioning of bodily processes that keeps us alive. When that's gone, we cannot even conceive of this. Now, the human mind is wonderful, and the human senses are wonderful, in that, at least indirectly, they can give us accurate information about any datum of existence. Now, I'm not claiming that any single human being can understand everything there possibly is to know. I don't even believe necessarily that there is a finite amount of information to know. However, any particular question you ask, any particular datum of existence you try to figure out, some human's mind, using some kinds of instruments, some kinds of logical devices, will be able to find out the answer. Likewise, with any problem in the world, some human's mind, eventually, with some kinds of instruments and ideas, will be able to solve that problem. Except for one question. And that question is, what is it like to be dead? Well, that question is not answerable. That question is not answerable because it is actually a falsely constructed question. It presumes that to be dead is to be. Once again, our language is so oriented toward existence that it's very difficult for us to grasp that death is the opposite of being. It is complete non-being. It is the complete disintegration of the individual. the complete disintegration of everything we perceive, everything we think about, everything we experience. And I believe that that is the worst possible fate. Because even if you suffer greatly, even if you endure horrific pain, torture, sadness, perhaps because of the loss of loved ones, at least your body and your mind can struggle against that. At least, perhaps, if you're experiencing pain and torture, your desire to endure that, your desire to overcome it, shows some endurance of your individuality, some kind of resilience within you. Likewise, if you've suffered a tragedy, a loss in the family, and you're determined at once to overcome it and yet to remember the people that you've lost, that also shows that your individuality continues to endure, that you have not been destroyed by this. But death is synonymous to your own destruction. Essentially, when you die, that's it. You've lost. There's nothing more for you. There's no you. And to add to that, as I mentioned in the first part of this presentation, others don't remember you. At least they don't remember you at nearly the level of detail that would be necessary for an accurate impression. So that is, I believe, the most horrific part of death, the annihilation of the individual. Now, of course, this great, horrific fact was the reason why religions were invented. Most people cannot bear the thought of the finitude of their own very existence. And naturally, it's a very counterintuitive thought, because you exist now, you perceive the world now. So surely, you might say, this existence must continue indefinitely. Surely, this can't be all that there is to life. Surely there must be another world where you continue to live after you die, and perhaps it's a better world. Well, it's a comforting thought. However, I do not see any evidence for another world. I do not see any evidence that the processes that animate our minds, the physical and chemical processes that are responsible for our perceptions, our feelings, our experiences, last when our bodies disintegrate. Because the physical organism is the sum of these processes. So when the physical organism ceases to be and these processes cease to be, how can the result of these processes, namely human consciousness, continue? So death is it. Death is the end. And the sooner we face that reality, the more readily we can combat it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we shall go next. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. We are now prepared to launch an all-out war on death. A large part of this war will be ideological and intellectual. I will need to convince you that the answers to two questions, a positive question and a normative question, are in the affirmative. The positive question is it possible for us to lift this death sentence that is hanging over all of us? The normative question is it desirable for human beings to live indefinitely? I believe the answer to both of these questions is yes. I will start by addressing the normative question, though I do believe that the positive question can be answered in great detail affirmatively, and I encourage you, if you are curious at this point, to go to www.mprize.org, where a lot of knowledgeable scientists will be able to convince you that yes, it is indeed possible to stop human senescence within our lifetimes, and at least greatly expand human lifespans by orders of magnitude through an approach called Strategies for Engineered Negligible Senescence, or SENS for short. But I would like to start with the normative question, because I believe that if you are convinced that resolving this problem is not only desirable but quite necessary, then you will be motivated to look for these positive solutions and perhaps contribute a great deal to the knowledge that is already there. Now, a common argument that is leveled against proponents of eternal life is, well, won't it be boring to live for a very long time? Now, I believe that the answer to that question is no, and I will endeavor to convince you of this. Think about this. How many books have you personally read? And what fraction is that number of the total number of books in existence? Let me give you a little hint. In just the United States, at present, over 1,100 books are being published every single day. Can you read 1,100 books a day? I don't think so. So you're missing out on much of the material that is just coming out, just the new material. But think about all of the material that has already accumulated. All of the information, all of the fiction, all of the non-fiction, all of the facts and experiences that you are just completely missing out on because of your miserably short lifespan. Think about this. Let's say you have an adult lifespan of 100 years, and you are a super avid reader. You can read one book per day without any problems. Let's say you go to your local library, and this is all you do for 100 years. You manage to eat and perform all the other necessary functions on the side. So, for 100 years, you will read approximately 36,500 books in your lifetime. How many books does your local library have? I'm pretty sure it's more than 36,500. So in a lifetime that is considerably longer than the average lifetime today, you will probably not be able to go through a single library of books. And somebody is going to tell me that extremely long lifespans will lead people to become bored? What about all the other experiences that human beings can have? What about all the places that they could see? What about all the art and music that they could experience? What about all of the careers and hobbies and occupations that they could undertake? Surely, you can't run out of these. Remember, there are many more books published every single day than you can read. Not only will you not run out of great new experiences to have, they will be accelerating away from you in terms of the rate of their creation. The number of things you can do increases faster than you can do them. And with the progress of our technology, this will only continue to increasingly be the case. This is like the derivative of acceleration. This quantity of things that you can do will accelerate away from your ability to do it. And the rate at which it accelerates away will also accelerate. And perhaps you could think of fourth and fifth derivatives as well in this sense. So boredom from living a very long time is not possible for a human being that really wants to appreciate what this world has to offer. Now, somebody alleges, oh, it'll all seem the same. Well, my elementary answer is, look out into reality. It's not all the same. New concepts, new ideas, new works of art and literature and music are being created every single day. If you think they're all the same, you either haven't been looking hard enough, or the problem is with your own mind and not with the world and not with your life. The problem is with your own approach toward the world. It is a great bit of common but not too common wisdom that says that the only people who truly get bored are boring people. People who, despite this abundance of possibilities for what you can experience and what you can do and what you can create, can't find a way to occupy their time. I find, personally, that I have the opposite problem. I have so many things I want to do, so little time to do them in. And come to think of it, if the life expectancy of human beings doesn't increase past what it is today, I've already lived a quarter of my expected life. That's frightening. That is completely frightening. Because I have not done nearly a quarter of what I want to do with my life. I have not done 1/1,000,000,000th of what I want to do with my life. Think about not just taking in what the world has to offer. Think about also contributing to what the world has to offer. Creating your own. Try composing some music. Try writing a book or an essay. If you're a painter, try creating a work of art. All of these activities will occupy a lot of your time, and they're extremely worthwhile activities to pursue. Try inventing a new technology. Try developing a new political system that will not oppress people. Don't tell me that you will ever be bored, because that is not a problem with human lifespans. That is a problem with some humans' thinking, erroneous thinking at that. A rational individual who likes to work and who can appreciate the world around him will not be bored, no matter how long he lives. He will always have more and more to experience. And what he has to experience, that store of things that he has yet to get to, will only keep increasing and increasing at an accelerating rate. So this argument is defeated hands down. Next, we shall address some other arguments commonly leveled against proponents of indefinite longevity. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. It is now time for us to strike another blow in the war against death by refuting yet another common argument leveled against indefinite life extension, namely the overpopulation argument, the allegation that if human beings are allowed to live for even a very long time, say 1,000 years, then the earth will become overcrowded, we will run out of resources, and lives will be miserable. Now, I believe that this is a false prognosis for many reasons. First, let's consider what has actually happened in the Western world with regard to the population explosion of the 20th century. Why is it that the doomsday scenarios offered by Paul Ehrlich in his 1968 book, The Population Bomb, failed to materialize? Why is it that we're not having global famines, increasing conflicts over resources, increasing scarcity of everything? Well, what Paul Ehrlich didn't take into account was the progress of technology. At about the time that Paul Ehrlich wrote, something happened called the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution allowed for genetically engineered crops to be inexpensively distributed to countries in the third or developing world and fed billions of people that would otherwise have starved. Now, farmers can grow crops at a much greater density than before, and can grow crops with far superior nutritional value than before. Golden rice, a genetically modified crop, is now being extensively distributed in the developing world and is going to alleviate a lot of hunger. And the other amazing thing about the Green Revolution is, despite extensive propaganda against it, with fears of frankenfoods and other scares being raised, not a single negative health consequence has been observed as a result of genetically modified foods. So that has fed a few billion people. There have been other trends in industrializing countries, such as the falling birth rate, which has dramatically slowed the rate of population increase. The fact is, the birth rate currently is falling in all countries as a result of the shift from a predominantly agricultural lifestyle to a predominantly urban manufacturing or service-based lifestyle. In a manufacturing or service-based economy, children become not producer goods, but consumer goods. On the farm, you always need an extra hand. It's nice to have 8 or 10 workers around, whom you don't have to pay wages, who will do a lot of the farm work for you. Now, in an urban setting, or in a service-based economy where there are a lot of advanced skills that are required, most children do not have yet the skills that are necessary for them to be competent in the workplace. And in the meantime, they need to be fed and clothed and educated for a while, and that becomes expensive. Many people can't afford to have a lot of children anymore, and moreover, there's a great opportunity cost to one's career of having a lot of children. So birth rates throughout the world right now are declining. And actually, in Europe, in Japan, in Russia, birth rates are right now falling below the replacement rate of the population. So, I don't believe that's a doomsday scenario either. I don't believe that we're either headed for a population bomb or a demographic winter. But I must note that with increasing industrialization, with the advent of more technologies, birth rates go down. There's no reason why this shouldn't continue to be the case. Now, the fears of those who believe a demographic winter may be upon us will actually be alleviated by the arrival of indefinite life, because we would not see any net population decreases if the birth rate keeps falling, people keep having fewer children, but the people who are around already are going to remain around. They're going to live indefinitely. So the overall population isn't going to increase. Very much, at least. And the people who are still around, because it's senescence, it's the biological aging process that we're going to try to combat, will not be a toll on them. They will still be as productive as before. They will still be able to produce goods and services, develop new ideas, and contribute to our economic well-being. So, we will not face the catastrophic overpopulation whether or not we have indefinite life. But if we have indefinite life, we will not face demographic winter. Now, furthermore, the idea that our resources are finite is not quite true, because a resource isn't the same as physical stuff. Yes, you could say the physical stuff the Earth is made of is finite, but a resource has to be something that is perceived by human beings to be useful. There was a time when oil was not considered a resource by human beings. It was considered a pollutant, just waste. Farmers would pay to have large amounts of oil removed from rivers that they had in their territory because it would just contaminate the crops. They didn't know what else to do with it. And then in the 19th century, John D. Rockefeller figured out that you could use oil for heating homes. And then later on, automobile manufacturers figured out how to use oil to fuel cars and other vehicles. And all of a sudden, from becoming a harmful nuisance, oil became a resource. And let me ask you another question. At which time in the history of the world has there been more oil available to human beings than at any other time? The answer is right now. There is more oil right now that we know of that is available for human use than has ever been available before. Because much of the oil that wasn't a resource earlier in our history is a resource now, because we've developed technologies to extract that oil from various deposits that would have been inaccessible to us before. Even if we had known, for instance, about shale, we would not have been able, in prior decades, to unlock the oil that is within it. And do you think that human ingenuity will stop all of a sudden? That humans will not invent new technologies and new ways of extracting these resources? The Earth, without any human technologies, could support a population of a few million people. Now we have 6.5 billion people and growing. And we have more than enough food to feed them all. And many, many other resources per person that were not accessible to even the kings of old. A very instructive book for those who fear overpopulation under any scenario is Julian Simon's The Ultimate Resource. The ultimate resource, according to Simon, is the human mind. The human mind invents continually new ways to develop physical things into resources that human beings can use. And that will include in the future new sources of energy, new ways of developing food, new ways of manufacturing things quickly and effectively, new ways of conserving our resources, so that even though we do have a finite amount of stuff to deal with, we can use that stuff in ways that can sustain an indefinite number of people. So not only will population probably not increase as dramatically as many predict, we will also always be able to keep up technologically with it, provided that we are free to innovate, and governments do not stifle individual inventors and individual entrepreneurs' desires and initiatives to improve the well-being of humans. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Here I will refute another argument that is commonly leveled against proponents of indefinite human longevity, namely the idea that by extending human life indefinitely and lifting this terrible death sentence that hangs over all of us, we are, quote, playing God. Now, it would be easy for an atheist like me to just brush this argument aside and say, well, I don't believe in God anyway, so how can we be playing a non-existent entity? Well, that argument then would not be very convincing to those people who do believe in God. And if you don't believe in God already, you obviously wouldn't be raising the playing God argument. So let me speak to those who would raise such an argument, and virtually all of these people are monotheists who believe in the Abrahamic God. Now, the Abrahamic God is defined as being simultaneously omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. Now, I believe that this definition is self-contradictory, but let's leave that aside for a moment. Let's consider, then, what playing God would have to mean. It would have to mean that humans would need to aspire to become simultaneously omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. Now, does anyone see a problem with this? I do. It's impossible. It is completely impossible for human beings to ever have the power to do absolutely anything at all. I believe that although any particular challenge can be overcome, overcoming that challenge raises lots of new questions and lots of new challenges that are derivative from that initial challenge, which has just been overcome. Think about what would happen, for instance, if human beings ever managed to send people to Mars. Well, the next question would be, can we establish a habitat for humans on Mars? And then once we've established a habitat for humans on Mars, can we terraform Mars so that we don't have to live in enclosed spaces all the time? And once we've settled Mars, the next question would be, well, what about those planets in other galaxies? Can we go there? What would be the resource expenditures required to do that? So every problem that we solve raises new problems, and at any point in time, we humans will never be omnipotent, no matter what we do. And likewise with omniscience, every question we answer raises 10 or more new questions that we can't answer at the moment, but may answer at some later time. And as for omnibenevolence, well, there will always be evil people, people who intend to do harm. Hopefully, as time passes, there will be fewer of them, but if human beings have free will, as many people with both a religious and non-religious disposition recognize, then a person can always choose to be evil. So it's not like human beings, all of them, will ever be completely benevolent all the time. So it's impossible for human beings to become like God under the Abrahamic definition. It won't happen. If human beings achieve indefinite longevity, there will still be many, many obstacles to them becoming omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. Let's say that human beings do manage to ward off senescence, so that we don't have to die before we're 100 or 120. Well, there will still be other major problems to resolve, like how do we prevent an asteroid from hitting the Earth and wiping out all of the human species and a lot of the other life that exists here? How do we settle other planets? How do we design viable political systems that don't oppress human beings and don't deprive them of their freedoms? Those will still be problems that we would need to address at that time. And moreover, curing senescence will not mean eliminating accidental causes of death. So other problems that would arise would be, how can we be safer? How can we fight fewer wars? How can we develop safer transportation? Surely, we would not be gods in any stretch if we lived indefinitely. All that we would be is a little bit less frail and a little bit less miserable. We wouldn't be condemned to death within a geological instant. I say that's not even close to playing God. That's not even thinking about playing God. That's not even dreaming about thinking about playing God. And besides, human beings, in the state of nature, have many fewer capacities than we have today. They're unable to communicate over long distances. They're unable to cure many diseases which are commonly curable today. They're unable to transport themselves very far. They're unable, even in many cases, to fight off vicious predators that currently can be very easily eliminated. Now, if somebody in an earlier era suggested one of these innovations, would it have been right to accuse that person, as many people doubtless did, of playing God, simply because he attempted to broaden the range of human ability? Now, as we understand, those prior inventions, which most religious people use as well, were not playing God, so neither will be the many future inventions that will come about. So, I'm not here trying to challenge anybody's faith in God, although in other places in this series I might. But for this particular argument to be rejected, you don't have to reject your religion. To have progress is not the same as to become or try to become omnipotent and omniscient. It is possible to recognize human limitations in that sense without renouncing all of the good things we can do to improve our lives. Greetings. Here I would like to refute two more commonly asserted claims against indefinite longevity, especially against the kind of longevity that would reverse the biological aging or senescence process and essentially keep us humans young for as long as we can be. So, one of the arguments is that getting biologically more senesced, getting older, is actually a great thing. It's a dignified state, it's a noble state, it's nothing to combat. And to that claim, I have to answer the following. There is common throughout human societies a certain respect for older people. Now, we have to ask, why does this respect exist? Is it because of superficial characteristics, like they have gray hair, they have wrinkled skin, they're not as physically able as younger people? Surely not. Surely that's not why many people in most societies have respected their elders. The reason why many people have respected their elders is because their elders had accumulated a store of life experiences and knowledge that they could share and pass on and help the younger individuals in that society prevent themselves from making certain mistakes or help them develop faster than they otherwise would have developed. This is why older people have historically been respected. And yes, it is great to have that knowledge and experience. And that's not going to go away with indefinite longevity. Actually, there's an excellent common saying that applies quite nicely to this. It goes like this: if youth knew, if age could. That is, the great tragedy of most human societies today is that the people who are able, because of their physical abilities, because of their levels of both physical and mental energy, to change things substantially for the better, don't know how to go about doing it. The people who do know, who have the life lessons that they need to change the state of affairs for the better, are too frail to do anything about it. And yes, some people might be able to snatch a few years from middle age to be able to really affect the state of the world for the better, but that's still not many people. Most people, by the time today that they reach a point in their careers where they're actually in control of substantial amounts of resources, have their health begin to fail, and therefore are not able to accomplish as much as their youthful selves would have wanted to accomplish. I certainly never want to be in that state, and I think both my younger and my older audiences will sympathize with me when I bring forth that proverb. So, yes, there is a reason to respect older people, but it's not because they're frail and decaying. It's because of their good attributes. It's because of what they can do and what they can teach us. And that will stay with the elimination of senescence. Imagine all of these older, wiser people having the bodies of 25-year-olds and still being able to teach us just as much or more. Because as they get even older, as they live into their triple and quadruple digits, they will accumulate even more life experiences, even better guides for those who are younger than they. So this argument doesn't hold. My second refutation concerns a claim made by some, most notably by Steve Jobs of Apple Computers, that death is needed to essentially replenish our creativity in a way by bringing fresh minds, fresh people into our society, by essentially throwing out the old, replacing it with the new, mixing things up a bit, and having people who can look at old problems from a new perspective. Now, I grant to Mr. Jobs and others who are like-minded that having the ability to look at problems from a new perspective can be beneficial in many times. Having a diversity of people with a diversity of ages, with a diversity of backgrounds, is always very good. But if this is the case, if they are correct in asserting this, then it would follow that more diversity is better. So let's ask this question. Which situation is more diverse? when we have 3 or maybe 4 generations alive at the same time, or when we have 50 or 100 different generations alive at the same time. You see, in order to bring in the new, we do not have to take out the old. As a matter of fact, if we let the old and the new compete simultaneously, we will be able to pick the best of all worlds. And of course, human beings aren't static either. They adapt to new ideas and new economic realities. So if anybody from any generation, if there are 50 or 100 of them, has an idea that transforms the society for the better, then most people from all the other generations will adopt that idea as well. I'm sure, for instance, that Benjamin Franklin would have loved the internet, as would Thomas Jefferson. They would have thought it a great way to disseminate information and ideas. And I'm sure if Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were alive today, they would have been on YouTube, delivering speeches, as I'm doing right now. So, in order to have a diversity of ideas and an abundance of new ways of looking at things, we do not need to kill or allow to die millions and billions of people. We just need to keep introducing new people, which will happen naturally. Some people will always have children, and if they don't have children, we can genetically engineer new human beings if that's the great concern, if we want more diversity of people from different ages and different generations. Don't need to let anybody die off. Once again, referring to my first presentation, it would have been invaluable for us to have some people around who had been alive during classical antiquity, during the Middle Ages, during the Renaissance, during the Enlightenment. Have them share their experiences, their views of how the world has changed, the lessons they have learned. The loss that we have experienced by not having these individuals around is incalculable. And it would be wonderful if we could minimize that loss in the future, if not altogether eliminated. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to refute yet another argument that is commonly leveled at proponents of indefinite human life, which I call the argument from motivation. This argument asserts that human beings, if they lived forever, would not be motivated to do much of anything because they don't have the sense of urgency of getting anything done. If they have all eternity to do it, this argument asserts, then they'll just sit around and be idle in the present because they know that they can get around to whatever activity is in question in the future. I believe this argument is false for several extremely important reasons. First of all, this argument presupposes that no person actually enjoys the act of creation more than the act of being idle. But surely, I have not met a single musician who did not enjoy the act of producing music, or a single painter who did not enjoy the act of painting, or a single inventor who did not enjoy the act of inventing. Surely, if a musician did not enjoy the act of producing music, not just the final result, but the process of creation itself, then this person has no business being a musician. He should do something where he actually enjoys the process, and the process doesn't just bring him disutility and stress. Moreover, people don't just enjoy the act of creating something, they enjoy the satisfaction that comes with having accomplished something. And so long as they are idle, so long as they do nothing, try to conserve their energies, they don't get that enjoyment. And eventually, the longer a time they spend being idle, the less marginal benefit they get from every additional moment of idleness, and the greater the marginal cost they incur from the foregone opportunities that they could have been utilizing at that time. So this explains, for instance, why even today, most people would get tired after sitting on the beach for a month. They might enjoy it for the first few weeks. They might consider it a useful respite from their everyday stresses. But then, after a while, it becomes monotonous, and they want to once again get back to work. If they had all eternity to lie around on the beach, I think they would get tired just as fast, if not faster, and want to get back to work. So, it seems that this argument from motivation presumes that work is always perceived to have a disutility that is much greater than the disutility of idleness, which is not the case. The law of diminishing marginal utility would state the contrary. Now, furthermore, let's assume the worst-case scenario, which is that the vast majority of people, once they get to live forever, are indeed idle in this way, at least at first. Now, of course, it would be absurd to assume that everybody, absolutely everybody, would think this way. And really, it takes only one counterexample to turn this scenario into a non-issue. So I'll introduce a counterexample. Myself. I know for a fact that right now, because of the limited time available in my life, I'm not exploring nearly as many fields of human endeavor. I'm not doing nearly as much in terms of a variety of activities as I would have liked to do had I had thousands of years ahead of me. So, if I did all of a sudden have these thousands of years ahead of me, I would all of a sudden invest myself in a much greater variety of activities. And I would do it very fast. And other people who think like me would do likewise, because they would understand the law of compound returns. The law of compound returns applies not just to money sitting in a bank account. It applies to the vast majority of human endeavors that have any kind of tangible byproduct. Let's say you are making a machine. Once you make that machine is capable of doing something. It is capable of making consumer goods, or it is capable of making other machines. And it is capable of making them in a greater quantity than unaided human labor could achieve. Likewise, if you use that machine to make even more machines, then you're going to have even greater productivity later on. And the earlier you start, the more astronomical your gains in productivity can be later on. Now, with regard to compound returns, the difference between waiting 1 year versus waiting 2 years isn't very large. But say the difference if, for instance, you decide to invest something for 4,999 years versus deciding to invest something for 5,000 years, even at a small per annum percentage increase, can be astronomical. It could be in the tens of millions or billions or trillions or even higher orders of magnitude, depending on the initial amount invested. So if I just have a choice of investing my money for 1 year or for 2 years, and I can invest it for 2 years if I start now, or for 1 year if I start next year, it won't make much of a difference to me if the percentage rate increase of my money per annum is not very large. But it would make a huge difference to me at the same percentage rate if I could invest my money now or next year for either 4,999 years or for 5,000 years. So that would give me an incentive to start really quickly. Now, what would happen to all those other idle people who see this and who see these astronomical gains accruing to a relative handful of individuals? Because in this scenario, everybody else is lazy and does nothing. The individuals who don't just sit around are going to acquire the vast majority of the resources. In fact, they're going to create so many resources that, relatively speaking, everything that came before their increased activity will seem fairly small. So everybody else will think, well, why are these people getting all the goods, and why are we not getting anything? Maybe it has to do with the fact that they're producing and we're not. And once again, this is where the positive motivation comes in. Most people are much more readily moved by carrot incentives than by stick incentives. If they see an excellent new technology that they could use that makes their lives more comfortable or more convenient, or that enables them to have a broader range of experiences, and they see somebody else having it, but they don't have it, they're going to want to have it. It's actually a much more effective incentive than to tell them, work or I'll kill you, or work and you'll die anyway, so you better work now, which is essentially the status quo. So I believe the argument for motivation fails. And in fact, it can be turned around. We could say that really, in the status quo, most people have no real reason to utilize their full potential when they work. Because why bother, say, making money or accumulating a lot of property when you don't have a long time to live in this world and it will all be gone for you? You're not going to experience it for very long, so what's the use? That could be an argument that would turn around the accusation of those who oppose indefinite human life. Now, of course, we see in today's world that many people do work and accomplish. But first I wonder, do they really, really use their full potential? Or, deep down, do they know that perhaps they could be working harder if they had a more compelling reason to do so? And second, of course, many people either try to ignore the thought of death. We don't think about it on a second-by-second basis. If we did, it would be debilitating. Or they try to essentially convince themselves that they're not really mortal after all. Think about the function of religion. Religion, at least Western monotheistic religions, and many polytheistic religions as well, try to convince you that you have an afterlife. And in the afterlife, you're going to live a better life than you do currently. You'll be rewarded for all the good things you've done in this world. So you had better do good things now, because this is a test phase of your existence. It's like a trial period of sorts. So many people who believe this, because they consider themselves immortal even though they're not, they have a motivation to accomplish more. Now, this ersatz immortality, this illusion of immortality, in my view, with all due respect to religious individuals, is not as good as the real thing. Because most religious people have had doubts, and they have had good reason to have doubts. There really is very little evidence that this immortality is in fact the case. So why place your bets on something so uncertain when you could work for a certain, or at least a highly probable, indefinite longevity in this world? You know that this world exists. You don't know that the afterlife exists. But with regard to motivation, it is certainly the case that a large percentage of the world's population is motivated to work on a day-by-day basis by a conviction of immortality. So the argument for motivation fails on multiple counts. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. The next allegation that I would like to refute, and this allegation has frequently been leveled against proponents of indefinite life, is that if eternal human longevity ever becomes available, it would become available only to the wealthy, and this would create an elite of unprecedented proportions, since the wealthy would not only have an advantage in resources that they do now, they would also be immortal, whereas everybody else would be mortal, and their immortality would give them more experience and a greater ability to collect even more resources. Well, I believe this is an extremely implausible scenario. First of all, in refuting this scenario, I'm going to assume that these cures for human diseases and other bodily perils are going to be available on a relatively free and open market. They're not going to be rationed or distributed by the state to people who are favored by the state, and only to those people. If the state did control the distribution of these cures, then we might get an elite. It wouldn't be an elite of the wealthy, it would be an elite of the politically favored, as we get under socialized medicine today. So, in a free market, however, this wouldn't happen. What happens in a free market has been described by Ray Kurzweil with regard to the adoption of many kinds of technologies, including computer technologies, other household implements, means of transportation. What happens is the first stage of a technology is one in which the technology is very expensive, very unreliable, and indeed only available to the wealthiest few, the people who are actually willing to put forth the tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars required to experiment with this new plaything. Now, later on, however, as the customer base for this technology expands, and as its creators and others who enter the field figure out more effective ways and cheaper ways to manufacture it, the technology becomes more widely available. It now is priced in such a manner that the middle class can afford it. It might still be fairly expensive, and it might still be a little bit less reliable than people would want, but it would be more broadly available. And then ways to mass produce these new devices come about, and increased competition comes into the field, which of course places a premium on higher quality products at lower prices. So now the products become very affordable, and quality goes up, they become more reliable. And the final stage that these technologies reach, as we've seen with many computer programs and internet-related applications, is that they become virtually ubiquitous and virtually free. Think about how much you're paying for your email access right now. It used to be fairly expensive. In the 1990s, you would have paid $30 or $40 a month for a few megabytes of email storage. Now they're virtually free, and the storage you get is functionally unlimited. So the same will occur with cures for various diseases. Certainly it's very costly these days to develop a new drug or a new treatment procedure. It would be probably less costly under a fully free market, where the FDA wouldn't exist to require a litany of overly stringent tests. But nonetheless, there would be some kind of expense associated with it. And naturally, the first few customers of these treatments are going to be people who can afford them, namely the very wealthy. But this initial stage is quite necessary for the technology to develop and essentially diffuse to the rest of the population. These wealthy individuals who are trying out the technologies at first are actually taking on a fairly extraordinary level of risk. What if the treatments go wrong? Now, if your iPod goes wrong, you don't lose very much. You might be down a few $100s. And if it's the newest version of the iPod, you might be disappointed. You were expecting something that would work and that would give you all of these new functions, and now you don't have it. But if it's a treatment for a disease, it might even backfire. It might not even be that reliable, and those wealthy few clients might actually suffer greatly. So they're not at all as highly privileged as most people assume they are. Indeed, their experience in trying out these products first is integral for quality products to come to the rest of us. Because, let's say a particular treatment fails for some reason, well, the scientists, the doctors, the inventors who have been developing it are going to learn something from it, and are going to try to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So, yes, there may be an initial stage in which the wealthy will be the first beneficiaries of these new technologies. But also, think about who these wealthy people would be. It probably wouldn't be the healthy wealthy people. It would be the ill ones, the ones with currently terminal diseases, say cancer, or Alzheimer's, or certain kinds of diabetes. So, wouldn't it be beneficial for these people to live instead of dying? That's not asking for very much. That's not asking for them to control society. That's just asking for them to live. isn't it a tragedy when any human being dies, no matter what his net worth is? So, surely it's perfectly justified for the wealthy to be the first people to try these things out. And those of them who do have my profoundest respect. I probably would not want to be one of the first people to try out these therapies. Of course, if I were terminally ill, I would have no choice. Anything is better than nothing. And probably many of these wealthy people would be thinking the same. So, quite the contrary. There's not going to be an elite that results from indefinite human life extension. Rather, there will be a group of pioneers that pave the way for the rest of us. And eventually, these treatments and technologies will be at least as ubiquitous as aspirin is today. And eventually, we will all be able to get cheap, high-quality treatments that will extend our lifespans astronomically, at least compared to how miserably short they are today. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I would like to talk about the very common phrase that is used: "There's nothing certain in life except death and taxes." And I believe that this saying is quite representative of the resigned attitude that all too many individuals have toward their ultimate non-existence in this world. They believe that it is something unavoidable, something inescapable, and while other events might turn out differently from what they expected, this one is certain to occur. And it's interesting also that they adopt the same attitude toward taxation, which is the foundation for all of the other compulsions of government. Now, interestingly enough, it turns out that neither death nor taxes are as certain or as inescapable as many people make them out to be. For taxes, this is the subject of another video series. With regard to death, not only is death not inevitable, there are certain species of animals existing today that either can completely escape death or can at least come extremely close. There are many kinds of animals that exhibit what is called negligible senescence. They might age biologically at a very slight rate, but much slower than we humans do. And some of these are actually species of turtles. In fact, the painted turtle exhibits negligible senescence, as does Blanding's turtle and the eastern box turtle. There are a few other animals and plants that exhibit this property. For example, the rough-eye rockfish exhibits this property. Also, the red sea urchin. Both of these can live over 200 years, and this has been observed. Moreover, the ocean quahog apparently can live up to 400 years. And to top it all off, certain plants also have negligible senescence. The most prominent example is the Great Basin bristlecone pine, which has been observed to live for 4,731 years. So these creatures have already, in their organisms, an ability to resist this kind of decay. And even if they do age biologically somewhat, it is at a much slower rate than we do. So we have something to learn about how these creatures manage to do that. And certainly, if these biological mechanisms already exist in nature, it should be possible eventually to adapt them to other organisms, namely ourselves. But it gets better. There is one animal that is functionally immortal, and this might surprise you, because it is not the typical candidate for functional immortality. As a matter of fact, if you saw it, you would either think it was very strange, or you might dismiss it as something too insignificant to merit your notice. It's about 4 to 5 millimeters in diameter, so it's barely visible. It's a jellyfish, or a hydrozoan, and its genus and species name is Turritopsis nutricula. These jellyfish have 8 tentacles when they're young, and they develop 80 to 90 tentacles as they reach maturity. Now, what's fascinating about these creatures, though, is no individual remains in an adult state once it has reached an adult state for the rest of its life. Rather, through a process called cell transdifferentiation, the Turritopsis nutricula once again reverts to a sexually immature condition. So it's the parallel of somebody growing up from a child to an adult, and then having some process to turn him or her back into a child again, and then growing up again, becoming a child again, and doing this repeatedly. What's fascinating about this is, through this process, these tiny jellyfish are able to render their cells and their entire organisms younger. They essentially reset their biological clocks, and they can keep doing this indefinitely. It's a fascinating process, and scientists have much to learn from this creature and from the others which exhibit negligible senescence. But death and taxes are certainly not inevitable, and the moment we cease accepting them as inevitable, we can start to find feasible, real-world solutions, hopefully in our lifetimes, which is why I'm making this video series, and I am trying to convince you to change your outlook on this question if you haven't already, and if you have, to continue the good work. Thank you very much. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I would like to talk about the phenomenon of cognitive dissonance, especially as it pertains to death. Now, cognitive dissonance is a fairly extensively studied phenomenon in psychology. People who exhibit cognitive dissonance hold sharply contradictory views on greatly related subjects without really being able to notice the tension. And I think the greatest cognitive dissonance in all of humanity has to do with death. And it is as follows. When any individual whom we know dies, if we are decent people, if we are not murderers or sadists, if we do not rejoice at the suffering and destruction of others, we are very sad. We mourn the loss of that person, even if we didn't particularly like that person when he was alive, even if we thought the person might have been annoying or disagreeable, or even hostile to some of our interests. Say, if some competitor in our careers, or say somebody who politically tried to thwart us, dies, we still mourn the death of that person. It's, I believe, undeserved for a human being to die, even if that human being holds very wrong ideas. So, if an individual is destroyed in this fashion, we mourn him. But so many people in the world, probably still the majority, believe that death in general is at least natural, and even, for many of them, desirable, somehow justified by the natural course of things. And therein lies the cognitive dissonance. The death of any particular person is seen as a tragedy, but death in general, which is just the sum of all the particular deaths, in all the particular gruesome ways that people can die, once again, there is no really peaceful or dignified way to die, is seen as normal, natural, and even desirable. Now, that is severe cognitive dissonance. How can any individual instance of something be bad, but the sum of all those instances be good? It makes zero logical sense. So, I urge consistency in one way or another. Of course, I would prefer consistency in one of these ways, but in order to be consistent, individuals who hold that death in general is good should also hold that any particular death is good, which of course would immediately lead everybody else to realize just how sad and just how contrary to our elementary understandings of morality and of the value of each individual human being such a position would be. I don't think any person who rejoiced at the death of a neighbor, a friend, or even an opponent would be respected or associated with by anybody else. But that is what that person would have to do if he would want to consistently hold the belief that death in general is desirable. Because anything in general is just the sum of all of its particular instantiations. Now, of course, I believe the much better consistent position is to hold that death in general and particular instances of death are all undesirable. Which means, if my friend dies, that's horrible. If my enemy dies, that's horrible. If a human being I don't know dies, that's horrible. And the fact that billions of people have died and faded in complete oblivion throughout history, that is also horrible. Unimaginably so. So that is the logical way and the moral way to resolve this commonly held cognitive dissonance. Now, I would also like to address some mechanisms that have evolved throughout the centuries to prevent people from thinking about this cognitive dissonance. Namely, I'm talking about euphemisms when referring to death. Now, one of the ways to be able to think that the death of an individual is a tragedy, while the death of millions, as Stalin put it, is a statistic, or even something great and noble and natural, is to conceive of individual death as something qualitatively different from general death. Typically, people refer to death in general as death, but in individual cases, they say not that this person has died, but that this person has passed on, or is no longer with us, or some other pleasant-sounding euphemism. Another example of this is to refer to somebody as the late person X. And whenever I hear that expression, I wonder, what is person X late for? Is he late for the bus? Is he late to work? Is he late to school? No! Absolutely not. He's not late to anything. He's dead. Destroyed. Absolutely gone. There is no more person X, and will never be a person X again. So, to compare that to being late to something is to minimize the horrendous significance of the fact that person X is irreversibly gone. So, what I would urge is a cessation of all euphemisms pertaining to death. Don't say, oh, this person has passed on. This person is no longer with us. Or worse yet, don't say this person is in a better place. He's not in a better place. He's nowhere. He's gone. He doesn't exist. Say, person X is dead. Say it with a straight face. Call things by their proper names. And when people, in general, begin to refer to individual death as death, and then, whenever they're confronted with arguments that death in general is good, then the cognitive dissonance will become much more apparent to them. So, next time you're at a funeral, or next time you discuss one of your deceased friends or relatives, don't mince words. Say, this person is dead, and I'm very sad that this person is dead, because through this person's death, we have lost something that we can never again regain. And also, don't try to sugarcoat the fact that some person has died. Don't use grand-sounding generalities about the nobility of death or the possibility of a better place. Whenever a person dies, This is not a loss that can be remedied by any kinds of words, and to attempt to remedy it is, I believe, an insult to the memory of the deceased. Rather, say openly and frankly, this person's loss is an irreversible tragedy. We cannot do anything to stop it. We cannot do anything to reverse it. The only thing we can do is look toward the future and make sure that further such losses do not occur. Thank you very much. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I would like to address a fairly infrequent but quite original argument against indefinite life, which some individuals might raise. And this argument suggests that if human beings live for very long amounts of time that begin to be geologically and evolutionarily significant, such as hundreds of thousands or millions of years, there could arise a peculiar kind of tension. That is, human beings who are 100,000 years old, for instance, might be very genetically different from their distant descendants, who, because they are separated by such a long time, there will have been time for evolution to substantially alter and change the makeup of the human genome and the qualities possessed by members of later generations of the human species. So this, according to those who promote this argument, might lead to certain peculiar social tensions if the evolution is such that the humans of the future have developed some remarkably superior capacities. For instance, then the humans who are older might have disadvantages in economic terms or in intellectual terms. They might be looked at as just curiosities or relics of the past. Now, this is a very interesting argument, certainly, but I don't believe that this is the scenario that will actually occur under indefinite life. And here's why I don't believe that it will occur. We need to think about what needs to happen to each individual in order for him to achieve indefinite life. Obviously, if we had the exact same bodies that we do right now, with all of their vulnerabilities, then we could expect to live, if we led healthy lifestyles, anywhere from 80 to 120 years. So, in order to live any longer, it's obvious that modifications would need to be made to the bodies of individual human beings. And these modifications would need to be made during their lifetimes. So it's not that we in our present forms are going to continue to exist forever and our genetic descendants are going to have different forms simply because of their evolution. Anybody who lives for a very long time will have to undergo periodic modifications to extend his or her longevity. For instance, we would need to figure out a way to rejuvenate various kinds of cells so as to prevent junk from accumulating within the cells or outside of the cells. We would need to prevent mutations of DNA within the nucleus of the cell and within the mitochondria of the cells. This obviously would be a very significant intervention in our biology, a kind of intervention that evolution in the pure biological sense would probably take billions of years to accomplish. But the main point is that through technological and medical intervention and alterations made to our organisms, we would be able to progress as individuals much faster than even biological evolution with the most positive outcomes would enable human individuals to progress over time. The fact is, biological evolution happens very, very slowly. And moreover, there's no guarantee in biological evolution that the traits that we as individuals consider most desirable are the traits that are going to be selected for. Rather, biological evolution simply occurs due to a natural selection process. The organisms that happen to be best adapted to the particular environment that they're in, and that environment includes freak accidents and natural disasters and various other very hostile circumstances, those are the organisms that survive. In some eras of the Earth's history, it was the complex organisms that were wiped out, and the very small organisms, such as the ancestors of all mammals, were the ones that survived, because they happened to be better suited. So biological evolution doesn't have all the desirable characteristics that technological progress does. Technological progress, because it is guided, directed, planned to a certain extent by human beings to take into account what human beings want as an improvement to themselves and their environments, has much more immediate results, and results that we as individuals find much more desirable. So I believe that come 100,000 years from now, the effects of biological evolution, while there might be some of that on the human species, would be extremely insignificant compared to the effects of technological evolution. What we are able to do to ourselves, due to our increased knowledge of science, engineering, medicine, and as a result, each of us as individuals would be able to benefit from modifications from the technology, including genetic modifications. So if it does happen that some mutation, by a very, very small probability, improves some individuals of the human species, then that mutation could also be incorporated into our further technologies. Genetic engineering could, of course, alter the genomes of existing individuals in order to assimilate any kind of favorable mutations into those genomes. So, as a result, technological evolution will predominate over biological evolution. Now, this is not anything new or radical. It has already been happening since the agricultural revolution of about 10,000 years ago. Think about it. How much of our progress has been determined just by changes in our genome versus how much of it has been determined by what we have done to ourselves and to our own environment. Virtually everything around us in our everyday lives has been created by humans. And indeed, our speech, our morals, our social and political systems, our machines, our instruments of learning, are all a product of technological evolution. So, comparatively speaking, the role of biological evolution will be very small. And if there are differences, they could easily be compensated for by the similar opportunities that humans of the future will have technologically. So I don't think there will be a gap between us, if we manage to live 100,000 years into the future, and our very distant descendants. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Thus far, in this series of videos, I have given numerous arguments for why death is the greatest threat to human beings, and why eliminating it is extremely desirable. I have also refuted numerous commonly made arguments to the contrary, and I've hinted that it is possible to reverse senescence, to delay senescence, and to live indefinitely, as certain organisms in nature already do, or at least come very close to doing. Now, I'm going to delve a little bit more into the question of feasibility, and try to convince you that it is indeed possible to achieve indefinite human longevity within our own lifetimes. The work that I'm going to be relying on here has been done by Dr. Aubrey de Grey of Cambridge University, who is both an engineer and a biologist. He has a PhD in biology, and he is also quite experienced in terms of computer engineering. And one of the wonderful things about de Grey's approach is that it's not the approach of the conventional scientist, who's primarily focused on theories and research and figuring out essentially how does one understand the status quo and how things work in the status quo. The mind of the engineer is more targeted toward solving problems, figuring out what is wrong here or what needs to be done, and how our existing knowledge can be used to solve that. So what Dr. de Grey has done is provide an overarching synthesis of the knowledge that exists up to our time about the causes of human senescence and biological decay. And what Dr. de Grey has found is very encouraging. There are 7 basic causes of damage that accumulate in the human organism as a result of senescence. All of these 7 causes have been known for at least 26 years. Now, what this means is that there probably aren't any others, because during the past 26 years, biotechnology and our understanding of human biology has made magnificent strides, and we have now so much computing power and far superior analytical techniques than we had in the early 1980s. So it's unlikely that any new causes are going to be discovered. So the 7 primary causes that Dr. de Grey depicts, I will be discussing briefly here. I can only provide a sketch, but if you want more specific details, I encourage you to look at Dr. de Grey's article, The Quest for Indefinite Life II, which I have linked in the references section accompanying this presentation. So the first cause was first pointed out in 1955, and it is cell loss or cell atrophy. And essentially, some cells deplete faster than they are created. This is especially true in the heart and in the brain and in muscles as the human organism senesces. And what can be done to fix this is, first of all, somehow inducing cells to divide more frequently naturally, or introducing growth factors into cells to increase the rate of growth and division, and also through stem cell therapy, which introduces entirely new cells into the organism, which can divide and grow even if the existing cells don't grow and replicate as fast as they are destroyed. The second cause is nuclear mutations of nuclear DNA, and the primary problem in that realm is cancer, because cancer is an extremely dangerous threat. If one cell in the whole body achieves a cancerous mutation, that could kill you. Many other kinds of mutations, such as mutations that suppress certain cell functions, they don't necessarily take over the entire body. A few cells might get them, but the other cells will function just fine. But a cancerous mutation has the ability to destroy the entire body, so it is by far the greatest threat. If you cure cancer, you, by and large, resolve that particular problem. Then, there's the problem of mitochondrial mutations, first pointed out in 1972. Now, mitochondria are cell organelles. They perform the function of cell respiration. They're essential for the cell to be able to utilize any kind of energy. And the mitochondria have their own DNA. If something goes wrong with that DNA, such as a mutation, the mitochondria will not be able to perform cell respiration properly, and the cells, of course, will not be able to get the energy that they require to function. So that needs to be fixed. In 1965, the fourth cause was discovered, which is cell senescence. Some kinds of cells, especially in cartilage and joints, accumulate over time, and these cells are often very toxic, and they produce an excess of certain kinds of proteins, which impairs bodily functions. Also in this category are fat cells, especially visceral fat cells within the abdominal cavity. So a technique needs to be discovered to go into these places and essentially obliterate these dangerous cells. The fifth cause is extracellular crosslinks, essentially proteins that are outside of the cells and exist outside of the cells for a very long time are susceptible to chemical reactions with one another. And these chemical reactions are very often unaddressed by the body's natural mechanisms, and these reactions distort the functionality of the proteins. One big consequence of this is the rigidification of artery walls, which causes a lot of heart problems for people later in life. This problem was first pointed out in 1981. So it's one of the latest of the 7 primary causes of decay through senescence. The sixth cause was identified the earliest in 1907 by Dr. Alois Alzheimer, the person who discovered Alzheimer's disease, and essentially stuff outside of cells accumulates that has no useful biochemical functions and indeed impairs many biochemical functions. A prime example of this are the amyloid plaques that occur in the brain and are the primary cause of Alzheimer's disease, which afflicts over half of the people over age 85. So if we can get rid of that, that would significantly extend the human lifespan, especially for older people. Now, intracellular junk is the last of these 7 causes. It was first pointed out in 1959. And this junk accumulates as a result of cells breaking down a lot of molecules of certain types. And the cell machinery to break down these molecules is fairly versatile, but there are many kinds of compounds that it simply can't deal with, and these compounds just accumulate over time. Now, for cells that divide very frequently, this isn't as much of a problem, because as the cells divide, the junk gets distributed among these cells. It gets diluted. But there are many cells that don't divide as rapidly. And so for them, the accumulation of this junk is a big problem. There needs to be a way found to essentially go into these cells and eradicate this junk every once in a while so that it doesn't impede the functionality of the cells. So here are the 7 causes. We already know what the problem is. We have a basic outline. And from that, plans of attack have been developed by Dr. de Grey and others. So this is an extremely promising field, and hopefully we will have some breakthroughs in it within the next 2 years and within the next few decades as well. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. So now that we've outlined the nature of the problem and the 7 primary causes of senescence, the next big question that arises is, how will indefinite life come about? What will be the process? What will be some steps along the way? And I would like to emphasize, first of all, that the common perception of how immortality might come about is not really the way it's going to happen. That is, at no point in time will there be invented a single pill or elixir or medicine that will make the person who takes it functionally immortal. Rather, longevity will be increased incrementally, step by step. Indefinite life will not occur as a result of human beings at any point in time having an infinite life expectancy. Rather, what will happen is that life expectancy will increase faster than human beings age. Currently, according to inventor and futurist Ray Kurzweil, whom I will mention later, we gain, on average, about 3 months of life expectancy every year. So, as we get older by 1 year, medical technology and other factors in our lives progress to the point that we can expect to live another 3 months longer than we could before. But of course, because we had also lived 1 year of our lives, the net change in our life expectancy is negative 0.75 years. But what is going to happen if the rate of medical and scientific progress and perhaps societal progress, so that we have fewer wars, fewer accidents, fewer other kinds of catastrophes and natural disasters, what if that rate becomes so fast that life expectancy will increase every year by more than 1 year? This means that the longer we live, the greater a life expectancy we're going to have. So just by surviving into the future, we can guarantee increasingly longer lifespans, and that, in effect, will be indefinite life. If we can survive to that threshold where life expectancy will begin to increase faster than we age or senesce, then we could at least get indefinite life. we would, of course, as individuals still have to be very careful not to die untimely deaths and wait for times when safety will be improved as well as medical technology so that the probability of dying an untimely death will be decreased. Now, of course, these improvements to human longevity will not come all at once. They will come gradually and incrementally, and indeed, many of them have already come about. Remember, the life expectancy of a human being without any kind of technology during hunter-gatherer times, during the Paleolithic era, was anywhere from 20 to 30 years. Now, it's in the high 70s and in the low 80s. Certainly we have come a long way. And as more diseases are cured, as various kinds of treatments and rejuvenation therapies are developed and marketed, that life expectancy will increase incrementally. And I believe it will increase at an accelerating rate because all of the discoveries of the past and of the near future will also fuel the discoveries of the more distant future. So some of the earlier immediate stages of this transition to indefinite life will involve experimentation on other mammals to show that life extension in those mammals is feasible. Indeed, efforts have already been well underway in this direction through the Methuselah Foundation and the Methuselah Mouse Prize. This is the brainchild of Dr. Aubrey de Grey, whom I mentioned in the previous video in this presentation. So the aim of the Methuselah Mouse Prize is to convince the general public that life extension in mammals by significant amounts is technically feasible. And if a lot of the general public and a lot of investors are convinced, then there will be much more funding available for research on human life extension. So there are two kinds of prizes under the umbrella of the Methuselah Mouse Prize. There's the Longevity Prize for making mice live as long as possible, and then there's the Rejuvenation Prize, where you take mice that are already fairly advanced in their age and you try to make them biologically younger and thereby extend their life expectancy. And we already have had remarkable accomplishments in that field. Now, it's important to keep in mind that mice live on average for about 2 to 3 years. So let's say, roughly, that 3 years is about 100 mouse years. Now, the current winner of the Longevity Prize is Dr. Andrei Bartka. Dr. Bartka has been able to get mice to live for 1,819 days. That is the record-holding mouse right now. That's 4.98 years, almost 5 years, or about 166 2/3 mouse years. Can you imagine how phenomenal it would be if we could get a human being to live for 166 2/3 years? Well, it's now possible in mice relative to typical mouse life expectancy. And the current Rejuvenation Prize is held by Dr. Steven Spindler, who, through techniques of caloric restriction, took mice that were about 19 months old, a little more than 50 mouse years old, and got them to live on average 1,356 days. That's approximately 123.83 mouse years. So imagine taking a human being who's a little over 50 and through some kind of rejuvenation therapies, first of all, making that human being 15 to 20% younger to start with, and increasing that human being's lifespan to an average of over 120 years. That's absolutely remarkable, what has been done in this field so far. And of course, research continues. There are numerous teams who are competing to break these records, and I wish them all the very best. And of course, we cannot predict the precise path that life extension is going to take. If we could predict it fully, if we could explain it in full technical detail, then we would be able to do it right now, and the problem would be solved. But as we can see, there is an overarching strategy. There's a general plan, there's a general idea of what might happen. And also Ray Kurzweil, who is an inventor and futurist who has won numerous awards of the highest caliber. He has developed a lot of software, a lot of artificial intelligence work, a lot of wonderful quality musical instruments, and a lot of technologies that have aided the disabled in living fuller lives, he predicts a gradual merger between human intelligence and artificial intelligence, and a combination of the relative strengths of the two. So certain aspects of computers are going to be incorporated into human minds and human bodies. For instance, the ability to crunch a lot of very routine calculations very quickly. Computers can do that, we can't. However, we can do a lot of qualitative processing of ideas much better than computers. Computers, at least at this stage, aren't very much inclined toward intelligent and creative argumentation, even though some of them are getting there. So an integration of human capacities and computer capacities would lead to much more intelligent beings, and these would still be us with our consciousness. It's just we would be enhanced in our abilities. And these beings, of course, we would be able to invent new technologies at a much faster rate than humans currently can, even with the help of computers who are separated from them. So, as a result, we can expect an acceleration of the rate of progress in extending human lifespans. So, that's a very hopeful pathway by which indefinite life extension can occur. And I wish all of these innovators, these scientists, the entrepreneurs, and the visionary thinkers all the best in defeating this greatest foe of humanity.